The House of Representatives will on Thursday consider a request by President Bola Tinubu for an amendment to the 2022 Supplementary Appropriation Act. The amendment is to allow the federal government to source 500 billion naira for palliatives to cushion the effect of subsidy removal. The president, according to the letter read by the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajudeen Abbas, said the money will be sourced from the 2022 Supplementary Appropriation Act of 819.5 billion naira. Speaker Abbas urged legislators to come prepared for the debate and necessary actions. We're now joined on the news by legal practitioner and public affairs analyst Liborous Oshoma for more on this story. Thank you very much for giving us your time. The request, we're told, is necessary in order to source for funds to provide necessary palliatives to cushion the effect of the recent removal of fuel subsidy in the country. There wasn't any specifics in the letter as to how the money will be used, although we had the president talk about cash transfer and how they want to be careful. But should that have been included for the sake of transparency?
The first thing that struck my mind was the moment I saw the letter, I went straight to look out for how this fund will be disbursed. And I discovered that it wasn't clearly stated in the request. I think when such requests are made to the National Assembly, even though the president would want to go straight to specifics, but I think for the purpose of transparency, it's always very wise and safe to include modalities for disbursement, because you can't tell me that those modalities will be worked out later while you are requesting the loan. I expected that all of the modalities for disbursement also would have been worked out even before they requested for the loan. And so, especially now that there's so much breach of trust between the people and government, and I think it would be wise and proper, subsequently to ensure that all of the modalities are spelled out, and then it will afford people the opportunity to chew on the issue, debate, the pros and cons of the modalities. That is a missing point that I think shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be business as usual the way it was before. The things should be done differently.
The next question that comes to my mind, really, it was originally the first question, but we needed to establish certain framework. The next question would be, on the average Nigerian's mind, I think, is what happened to the controversial $800 million World Bank loan approved by the Senate of the previous administration, allegedly to be disbursed to about 50 million vulnerable Nigerians as part of its fuel subsidy palliatives measure. Is it that this administration is unable to assess this?
Yeah, I think, and that's why transparency is very key. Before I answer your question, I also want to add a rider to that your question. The federal government said they were spending about 404 billion naira monthly to subsidize the consumption of PMS in Nigeria. So once you remove subsidy, the presumption is that there's a 404 billion naira that had been saved. So nobody's asking. That money that had been saved, that money that was supposed to be spent on subsidy that had been saved, what are we using the money for? Where has it been plowed to? Which sector of the economy? Because the essence of removal of subsidy is that we need to remove subsidy so that we can save more money to plow into critical sector. So that money that had been saved, we first need to ask, where is that money? Before we now go to the issue of the $800 million that the federal government said had been approved by the World Bank for Nigeria, and they just needed the National Assembly approval to disburse the fund. The National Assembly gave that approval at the end of the day till date. The moment that administration left, nobody's asking the question, what happened to that 800 million? Was it actually disbursed? Was the money received? If it was received, what happened to it? If it wasn't received, what now happened to the document that was signed? All of these are questions that are still hanging in the air, and yet we're talking about another 500 million. There are so many questions
I was hoping maybe you would give us some pointer as to whether this administration doesn't have access to that money. But in the interest of time, there is one important question I would like to ask. You can add it to your response, but in the interest of time, the former president, Buhari, introduced the supplementary budget for a particular reason. And what was said was for capital projects due to the impact of floods on farmlands and also for road infrastructure. If 500 billion is to be taken, what would be left? Can we say the purpose is now being redirected? And in your opinion, how wise would be that decision?
Look, that's why those questions are critical. As a policy analyst, mine is also to raise questions on the basis of the policy that the government has brought up. The government is saying we needed to save subsidy fund to plow into critical sector. And one of such sectors is the flooded areas that you talked about. Now the money saved, the government is not talking about it. The initial money borrowed that was not disbursed, the government is not also talking about it. And yet the government is talking about borrowing another 500 million for palliative, which is not clearly spelled out as we speak now. So these are critical questions that we are all asking the government. And in the few days to come, we do not just want the government to talk about modalities for spending or the modalities for disbursement. The government also needs to answer those questions that I have raised about the funds saved, the initial 800 billion borrowed, and then if you're taking this money for palliative, those areas that you wanted to spend that 500 billion naira, what happens to those critical areas? Are they going to be left unattended? So all of this vacuum needs to be clearly filled before, so that we avoid a situation where tomorrow this money is borrowed and the way it is shared, we do not know, because palliative had been shared before now, but at the end of the day, it didn't get to the people that
I guess we have plenty of questions to ask this administration in the coming days. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
My pleasure, always.